We stand beneath our towering American skyscrapers, utterly convinced that we have mastered the physical world. We are taught that the sun is the absolute pinnacle of heat. We assume black holes hold the monopoly on ultimate gravitational destruction. But our universe hides a much colder truth. There is a cosmic anomaly out there that requires absolutely zero heat or pressure to annihilate you. From 1,000 miles away, it can simply erase your entire existence without a sound. It just forces your atomic structure to stop cooperating. So what exactly is this invisible monster? High above the frozen streets of Chicago, the winter wind howls with brutal intensity. It cuts right through his thick safety gear without any mercy or hesitation whatsoever. Marcus, a 28-year-old steel construction worker, stands firmly on the exposed 80th floor. He is a strong man carved by years of relentless and grueling manual labor. His broad shoulders are perfectly built for moving mountains of heavy architectural metal. The morning air is a bitter -10 degrees in the bustling American city. Despite the extreme cold, heavy sweat still pools around his yellow protective hard hat. Down below, the sprawling metropolis looks like a simple grid of tiny gray boxes. Can you clearly imagine standing on a narrow beam above the dangerous, terrifying urban void? Right in front of him hangs a massive 5-ton structural steel building beam. It is dangerously suspended only by a series of thick industrial crane cables. Marcus firmly grips a heavy pneumatic wrench with his tough, calloused bare hands. His strong muscles tense as he carefully aligns the giant steel securing nut. The thick veins in his forearms rapidly bulge under the intense physical pressure. Every turn of the heavy wrench requires a brutal output of biological energy. His heavy boots tightly grip the frosted steel surface to anchor his body. Bone, muscle, and blood are constantly pushing back against the immense architectural density. Has he not proudly mastered this daily battle of friction and brute force? This extreme physical labor represents the solid foundation of the modern American structural landscape. We constantly construct towering urban monuments out of reinforced concrete and hardened industrial steel. Everyone in society implicitly trusts the absolute permanence of dense and highly solid matter. Marcus aggressively strikes his heavy metal wrench against the giant suspended structural steel beam. It instantly produces a deafening metallic clang that rings loudly across downtown Chicago. That sharp echoing sound represents the definitive auditory proof of a solid physical reality. The forged structural steel never yields, and the thick concrete absolutely refuses to bend. This tall skyscraper firmly resists the immense gravitational pull of our entire home planet. Do we truly have the absolute right to blindly trust our seemingly solid surroundings? Now listen carefully to the hidden and fascinating truth behind this grand structural illusion. The primary reason Marcus does not fall violently through the steel is purely microscopic. According to classical physics, the negatively charged electrons in his boots violently repel the girder. This fundamental electromagnetic force creates the ultimate convincing illusion of an impenetrable solid physical surface. The microscopic atoms firmly refuse to share the exact same localized physical and spatial coordinates. They constantly push back with an incredible microscopic resistance that powerfully supports massive urban structures. This invisible atomic resistance acts as the undisputed bedrock of our entire modern human civilization. We build sprawling metropolitan cities based directly on the comforting assumption of perfectly rigid atoms. Who would ever dare to logically question the structural integrity of a massive steel beam? But the real secret is quietly hiding just beyond our extremely limited human physical perception. That familiar psychological feeling of absolute structural solidity is nothing more than a cosmic coincidence. Our fragile brains are evolutionarily hardwired to understand only the gentle environment of planet Earth. To Marcus, the heavy steel beam represents the most indestructible physical object in daily existence. Millions of tons of heavy steel and glass pressed deeply into the solid Chicago bedrock. This immense architectural weight currently seems entirely invincible to the untrained and naked human eye. We always blindly measure absolute strength using heavy industrial machinery and dense earthly architectural materials. Could our classic scientific definition of immense physical strength actually be completely wrong and misguided? We usually take immense pride in our architectural achievements and our complete mastery over matter. Marcus finally finishes physically tightening the massive nut on the extremely heavy steel support frame. He carefully wipes the freezing sweat from his tired brow with a deep sense of accomplishment. He views a highly permanent physical fortress of human engineering, an absolutely undeniable structural architectural triumph. The incredibly thick steel beams confidently maintain their perfectly intended shape, despite the freezing winter winds. The rigid concrete foundations remain securely planted deep inside the completely frozen terrestrial ground far below. Every single building below perfectly exists because terrestrial matter stubbornly refuses to ever collapse inward naturally. But what would actually happen to this entire city of Chicago if it were suddenly compressed into a single pea? To understand the absolute terror of a collapsed stellar core, we first need to look closely at our own planetary shield. Earth is wrapped in a gentle, invisible magnetic field. This field quietly deflects deadly solar radiation and safely guides the fragile needle of a pocket compass. It is a deeply nurturing force that occasionally paints the winter skies with glowing auroras. We inherently trust this invisible blanket because it has safeguarded biological evolution for billions of years. What happens when that exact same fundamental force is artificially amplified by a billion trillion times? Enter the Magnetar, an impossibly dense remnant of a dead supergiant star floating in the cold void. Imagine an object packing the immense mass of 500,000 Earths into a perfect sphere barely the size of downtown Chicago. But the real secret is not its crushing density or its blindingly fast rotation speed. The true horror lies in a magnetic field so violently powerful that it physically warps the geometry of empty space around it. If one were to suddenly appear halfway across the United States, your primal intuition would scream at you to brace for a catastrophic fiery impact. Would we simply burn to ashes like a moth flying into a cosmic furnace? Here is where it gets interesting, because the universe rarely plays by our limited terrestrial rules. Our Hollywood-trained brains almost always assume that galactic death comes from dramatic physical collisions, melting heat, or the inescapable gravitational crushing of a black hole. We fully expect an apocalyptic asteroid impact or a colossal wave of plasma consuming the familiar Chicago skyline. But a Magnetar completely bypasses the clumsy, primitive mechanics of blunt force trauma. It absolutely does not need to crash into the Earth to erase your existence. It does not even need to graze our outer atmosphere to permanently end all biological functions on this planet. The absolute devastation it brings requires zero physical contact. Let us bring this cosmic monster exactly 1,000 miles away from Marcus, who is still suspended on that freezing steel beam above the city. At this precise distance, the Magnetar's invisible magnetic web violently intercepts the fragile bioelectrical network running through his human body. The human nervous system operates on tiny electrical impulses, sending delicate chemical signals from the brain to control the muscles. Instantly, the overwhelming magnetic interference scrambles every single neural pathway in his tough 28-year-old frame. Marcus would not even have the fleeting luxury of understanding what went wrong before his reality completely dissolved. His brain would frantically fire chaotic, terrifying hallucinations as his internal electrical circuits simply shorted out in a fraction of a second. He becomes a paralyzed prisoner inside his own rapidly failing flesh. Now listen carefully, because the subsequent physical degradation is vastly more gruesome than mere neurological paralysis. Human blood naturally carries billions of red blood cells, and every single one of them critically relies on a microscopic atom of iron to transport vital oxygen. Normally, this iron is safely locked away in stable chemical bonds, completely unaffected by the weak magnetic fields we encounter on Earth. But under the tyrannical, absolute influence of a Magnetar 1,000 miles away, the fundamental rules of earthly chemistry violently collapse. The magnetic pull becomes so astronomically severe that it forcefully strips the iron atoms directly out of his hemoglobin. The microscopic metal violently tears through his cellular walls, instantly suffocating him from the inside out in a grotesque display of physics. He is torn apart by his own blood. Now let's think about another possibility with this cosmic anomaly. What if we actively hunt it down? Down in San Francisco, hidden behind the sleek glass facades of Silicon Valley, 45-year-old billionaire David Sterling has a very different vision. He does not look up at the night sky with philosophical wonder. He looks up and sees an unexploited resource. Our civilization is desperately hungry for energy, constantly burning through resources just to keep the servers running. Sterling believes that the raw, unfathomable power of a dead star could be domesticated and packaged for human consumption. He wants to put a leash on a cosmic monster that is pure arrogance. Inside his pristine virtual reality simulation room, Sterling prepares for a digital heist. He is wearing a haptic feedback suit and a next-generation VR headset connected to a superhuman AI cluster. In his digital vision, he is standing in his opulent penthouse office overlooking the bay. His AI has been fed every known quantum physics equation and general relativity model ever conceived. The objective is shockingly simple. He commands the AI to simulate the extraction and teleportation of exactly 1 teaspoon of matter from the crust of a Magnetar directly onto the designer glass table in his virtual office. Just a single teaspoon. The contrast is almost comical. We are talking about utilizing the most advanced computational networks on Earth to manifest something you usually use to stir your morning coffee. It is a profound mismatch of scales. But here is where it gets interesting. This single teaspoon of star stuff represents the absolute pinnacle of human hubris. Sterling is not satisfied with wind turbines or nuclear fusion. He wants to cage a phenomenon that warps the fabric of space, believing his intellect can outsmart the brute force of the cosmos. He examines the projected containment field that his engineers theoretically designed to hold the sample. The AI warns him about the extreme mathematical parameters required for this operation, flashing red warnings across his peripheral vision. He dismisses them with a casual flick of his wrist. He wants to see the ultimate power source sitting quietly on his desk like a tamed pet. Will the universe actually bow down to a venture capitalist? The simulation officially initiates with a soft digital chime. Now listen carefully, because what the AI calculates next is entirely based on unforgiving physics. The virtual environment renders a perfectly polished silver spoon resting delicately on the transparent glass surface. Inside the bowl of that spoon, a tiny glowing speck of neutron-rich matter materializes. It is no larger than a grain of sand, pulsing with an eerie violet light. Sterling leans in close, captivated by the sheer beauty of the trapped stellar material. He believes he is looking at the future of humanity, a future where energy scarcity is nothing but a forgotten concept. He smiles, feeling like a modern Prometheus who has successfully stolen fire from the gods. It is a beautiful delusion. What happened next will surprise you. Sterling expects the containment field to stabilize the speck, perhaps generating a steady stream of usable electricity to power the entire western seaboard. Instead, the simulation stutters. The superhuman AI, capable of processing trillions of operations per second, begins to struggle with the sheer mathematical weight of what it just brought into existence. The contrast between the mundane corporate office and the apocalyptic density of the material creates a digital paradox. A teaspoon of this substance does not weigh a few grams. It weighs roughly 1 billion tons. The AI desperately tries to render the localized gravitational effects of 1 billion tons of ultra-dense matter sitting on decorative furniture. How can a simple piece of glass support the weight of a mountain? The illusion of control shatters in an instant. The immense magnetic field radiating from that tiny speck does not care about the theoretical boundaries of the containment field. Before the glass table even has a chance to crack under the impossible weight, the magnetic lines of force violently strip the electrons away from the atoms composing the table. Sterling watches in absolute horror as the structural integrity of his perfectly curated office simply ceases to exist. The pristine environment does not burn or explode in a traditional sense. It unspools. The hubris of Silicon Valley, the billions of dollars invested in this simulation, and the absolute certainty of human supremacy are completely undone by a speck of matter smaller than a sugar cube. It is a terrifying reality check. Nature cannot be bought. The simulation initiates with a soft digital hum in the pristine San Francisco office. David watches through his advanced VR lenses as a robotic arm carefully lowers a single shimmering teaspoon of Magnetar star stuff over his sleek glass desk. He initially expects a localized anomaly, perhaps a shattered desk or a cracked floor to study and contain. What would happen if we harnessed the ultimate battery of the cosmos? He smiles, ready to witness a triumph of human engineering. But what happened next will completely shatter his arrogant illusion. The moment the virtual spoon tips, the mass of 1 billion tons is subjected to Earth's gravity. The glass table does not simply break or shatter into pieces. It instantly vaporizes under the sheer localized pressure. The dark matter drops through the expensive hardwood floor, bypassing the reinforced concrete foundation of his Silicon Valley estate as if it were made of thin morning fog. There is no resistance. This is not a slow, dramatic descent you see in Hollywood movies. It is a terrifying, instantaneous plunge dictated by the ruthless laws of physics. Gravity blindly pulls this monstrous density straight toward the center of the planet, oblivious to the fragile ecosystem resting on the surface. How could a mere planet support the weight of a dead star? The answer is simple. It cannot. This unimaginable density accelerates downward, tearing a microscopic but devastating hole straight through the continental crust. As it reaches the mantle, the sheer friction and gravitational distortion begin to warp the tectonic plates from the inside out. Now listen carefully, because this is where the true horror of the cosmos reveals itself. The teaspoon of Magnetar does not stop at the mantle, but plunges violently into the molten iron core of our planet. The impact generates a shockwave so profound that it destabilizes the entire internal magnetic field structure of the Earth. Within mere seconds, the ground in Chicago, New York, and every major city worldwide ripples and bursts open. Massive global earthquakes tear continents apart simultaneously. The ocean floors split wide open, swallowing billions of gallons of water into the boiling mantle below. Entire mountain ranges crumble into dust in the blink of an eye, completely wiping out thousands of years of civilization without a single trace. Can you imagine the absolute silence of space watching our vibrant blue home crack like a fragile eggshell? The simulation shows the entire globe fracturing, lit by a terrifying orange glow from within, before the core simply gives up. David violently rips the VR headset off his face, gasping for air as if he had been drowning in the dark void of space. He stumbles backward, his expensive tailored suit suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating cage. He falls to his knees on the very same hardwood floor that his simulation just proved was entirely meaningless. The digital screens around him continue to flash streams of data, stock prices, and AI algorithms that now seem incredibly childish. He built an empire on the idea that human intelligence could domesticate any natural force. Yet he just witnessed the ultimate veto power of the universe. What good is a billion-dollar bank account when a single spoonful of distant matter can bypass all your security protocols and shatter your world? His profound wealth, his visionary status, and his cutting-edge technology are nothing more than a pathetic illusion of control. We build our gleaming cities and code our brilliant software, convincing ourselves that we are the absolute masters of our domain. The universe does not care about your startup valuations or your ambitious plans for the future. It operates on a scale of violence and mass that reduces our greatest human achievements to absolute zero. There is no negotiation with a dying star. He just sits there, staring blankly at the empty glass desk, completely paralyzed by the crushing weight of human insignificance. Let us shift our perspective away from shattered tectonic plates. We must actively zoom down into the bizarre quantum realm. Now listen carefully, because the horror of a magnetar is strictly microscopic. The fundamental building blocks of reality are surprisingly fragile and highly sensitive. You usually think of physical destruction involving intense heat or massive kinetic impact. A speeding car crash or devastating nuclear blast shatters solid matter violently. But a magnetar operates on a completely different and far more chilling principle. It entirely rewrites the basic rules of microscopic engagement for every single atom. What holds your fragile organic body together right at this exact moment? It is not gravity or magic, but rather simple, everyday atomic chemistry. In our safe terrestrial environment, standard chemical bonds act predictably and reliably. Picture the invisible electron clouds orbiting a normal carbon atom inside your DNA. Under normal conditions, these fundamental electron orbits resemble perfectly round spheres. These tiny spherical clouds comfortably overlap to form extremely stable and resilient molecular bonds. This overlapping geometry allows eukaryotic cells to effortlessly build complex organic human tissue. It is the exact same reason your ceramic coffee cup holds boiling liquid. The spherical nature of atomic electron orbits guarantees absolute physical structural integrity. Everything you touch, love, and build heavily relies on this simple spherical geometry. Have you considered what happens when this fundamental microscopic geometry forcibly changes? The entire foundation of everyday human existence would instantly and quietly fall apart. Here is where it gets interesting, and simultaneously terrifying for our biology. A magnetar projects a magnetic field quadrillions of times stronger than Earth. When this incomprehensible cosmic force washes over normal matter, the underlying physics breaks. The unimaginably intense magnetic field overpowers the standard electrical forces between atoms. It aggressively grabs those perfectly round electron spheres and brutally stretches them. The natural three-dimensional atomic space is ruthlessly flattened by this invisible magnetic tyrant. Normal covalent bonds simply cannot function under this extreme level of magnetic distortion. The complex biological molecules that firmly dictate human life immediately begin to fail. How can any organism possibly survive when its own cellular chemistry turns alien? The incredibly harsh reality is that carbon-based biology stands absolutely zero chance here. Under this overwhelming magnetic influence, the spherical electron clouds undergo a grotesque transformation. They are forcefully stretched into impossibly thin structures that strictly resemble incredibly sharp needles. These dangerous quantum needles align perfectly parallel to the overpowering stellar magnetic field. Because the electrons are trapped in these narrow tubes, chemical bonding becomes completely impossible. The intricate chains of proteins and complex carbohydrates instantly lose their critical geometric shapes. They can no longer lock together to form the strong fibers of human muscle tissue. Imagine trying to build a sturdy brick wall using only slippery, wet spaghetti noodles. Your complex organic body is abruptly reduced to a disconnected soup of totally isolated atoms. Does this cold, silent microscopic dissolution not sound worse than a fiery terrestrial explosion? The physical structure of human flesh just loses all its natural biological binding instructions. This is the ultimate academic tragedy of encountering such a terrifying stellar remnant. There is no dramatic cinematic explosion when your human body finally disintegrates entirely. You are not violently crushed under unimaginable weight or instantly burned alive. The atoms constituting your warm skin and pumping heart stop recognizing each other. They quietly drift apart into the cold vacuum because the magnetic field commands it. Your biological existence is meticulously erased without a single drop of spilled red blood. It is a profoundly chilling demonstration of how deeply fragile our material reality truly is. We mistakenly believe we are solidly built, permanent fixtures within this vast physical universe. But what are we really beneath the comforting illusion of our everyday terrestrial physics? We are merely temporary geometric arrangements waiting for the underlying cosmic rules to change. That cold academic truth fundamentally destroys our arrogant perception of human physical invincibility. The highly advanced macroscopic mechanics that power our impressive civilization mean absolutely nothing here. A simple shift in microscopic geometry instantly deletes centuries of biological human evolutionary progress. Your consciousness would simply fade as your neural pathways gently dissolve into cold atomic mist. The magnetar does not hold any malicious intent or active hatred toward biological human life. It simply exists, completely rewriting the fundamental laws of nature by its mere silent presence. This extreme cosmic phenomenon flawlessly exposes the devastating illusion of our solid physical bodies. Do you finally understand the horrifying fragility hidden deep inside your own cellular structure? The physical body is never truly destroyed by the invisible magnetic force of the magnetar. It is simply forced to peacefully let go of its own temporary physical existence. So, what does it mean for us? After simulating the horrifying collapse of our planet and the microscopic unraveling of our very flesh, we have to profoundly pause and look up at the calm night sky. The universe is incredibly violent, utterly indifferent, and densely packed with celestial monsters that could easily erase our entire civilization in an absolute fraction of a heartbeat. Yet, you casually woke up this morning, drank your warm coffee, and stepped out into a perfectly stable, beautifully mundane world. Why are we still breathing right now? The answer is not that we are somehow physically special, nor are we shielded by some impenetrable magical cosmic fortress. The brutal, unsentimental truth is simply distance. We are saved by empty, unimaginable, terrifyingly vast stretches of dead space. It is a spatial paradox. Space itself is the only thing protecting us from what lives inside of it. Here is where it gets interesting. Our specific solar system is tucked safely away in a quiet, incredibly boring suburban spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy. The closest known Magnetar is currently lurking tens of thousands of light years away from our fragile blue atmosphere. That terrifying magnetic web of instant destruction naturally decays over those incomprehensible cosmic miles, ultimately fading into absolute nothingness long before it ever has a chance to reach our delicate biological networks. Think about the bustling, confident streets of Chicago, or the highly secure billion-dollar server farms sitting in Silicon Valley. Our entire human existence, with all its grand technological achievements, is essentially a cluster of rare orchids blooming stubbornly in the very middle of a raging, boundless ocean of boiling acid. We survive strictly because that cosmic acid has not happened to splash our way yet. It is pure, unadulterated astronomical luck. But how long does this random luck actually last? If the dark universe is truly teeming with these invisible, silent destroyers, we might merely be living on drastically borrowed time. We proudly measure our human history in mere centuries, loudly celebrating a few thousand years of building tall skyscrapers and writing complex code as if it were a permanent, final victory against the harsh cosmos. But in the grand, sweeping, unfathomable timescale of the universe, 100,000 years is not even a single blink of an eye. It is terrifying to imagine what exactly happens if our moving solar system eventually drifts just slightly closer to a completely dormant stellar remnant. A wandering, rogue Magnetar could easily slip into our immediate galactic neighborhood while we are entirely busy arguing over trivial terrestrial politics. Who knows, maybe we are entirely invisible to the universe, or maybe we are just waiting blindly in the cosmic firing line. We walk around every single day with absolute unquestioning confidence in our localized physical reality, deeply trusting the solid concrete beneath our feet and the vital iron actively pumping through our veins. We boldly build advanced virtual reality simulations to play God, arrogantly assuming that we can eventually master and control all the fundamental forces of nature if we just write enough brilliant software. But when you finally step back and truly understand the horrifying scale of what is actually out there in the dark, that human arrogance completely evaporates into the vacuum. The eerie cosmic silence that we so often complain about might actually be the greatest, most profound blessing we could ever possibly ask for. We are simply not prepared to one day face what actually lies hidden in the deep dark. We should perhaps just be quietly, humbly grateful for this tiny, beautiful, fleeting moment of absolute cosmic isolation. It genuinely makes you wonder about everything. Let us take a moment to look back at the extreme contrasts of human ambition we have explored today. In Chicago, Marcus builds monuments in the freezing winds, placing his absolute faith in the physical strength of forged steel and poured concrete. In San Francisco, David Sterling operates in a sterile environment, placing his ultimate trust in the intellectual supremacy of code, capital, and artificial intelligence. Both men, despite their vastly different worlds, operate under a fundamental delusion about the universe. They firmly believe that the structures we build are permanent. They assume human control over physical reality is absolute. But what happens when that comforting illusion violently shatters? Here is where it gets profoundly terrifying. The universe does not recognize our pathetic definitions of structural strength or financial wealth. To the cold vacuum of deep space, a towering skyscraper and a virtual reality headset are exactly the same thing. They are just temporary, highly unstable arrangements of atomic particles. When we look at a massive steel beam, we see an unbreakable physical anchor. When we look at a billionaire's offshore bank account, we see an impenetrable shield against chaotic forces. Are these defensive barriers actually real? The cosmic monsters lurking in the dark do not care about your diversified stock portfolio or your impressive physical endurance. Think about Marcus gripping that massive steel bolt high above the bustling city streets. He feels the solid, reassuring weight of the metal, entirely confident that the invisible molecular bonds will hold the structure together for centuries. That specific confidence is the undeniable bedrock of modern human engineering. We build massive suspension bridges and sprawling cities based entirely on the assumption that matter is stubbornly loyal to us. But that atomic loyalty is strictly conditional. What happens if the fundamental rules governing those microscopic bonds are suddenly rewritten by a distant stellar corpse? The steel does not melt or shatter, it simply surrenders. Now consider David Sterling standing in his completely shattered virtual paradise. He truly believed that human intelligence could put a digital leash on the infinite destructive power of the cosmos. He thought a theoretical containment field programmed by supercomputers could successfully negotiate with extreme gravity and magnetism. That is the inescapable tragedy of the human ego. We foolishly assume that because we can mathematically measure a cosmic phenomenon, we can master its existence. Does a complex quantum equation actually protect you from a localized gravitational collapse? Money, social status, and artificial intelligence are purely human constructs, rendered utterly useless when confronted by a dead star. But the real secret is understanding that everything we know is merely a temporary geometric configuration. The iron atoms in the warm blood pumping through your veins are indistinguishable from the iron atoms found in the core of a dead planet. The carbon forming the complex neural pathways in your brain is the exact same carbon drifting silently between distant galaxies. We constantly draw arbitrary comforting lines between conscious biology and inanimate geology. A cosmic anomaly simply erases those imaginary lines instantly. It does not murder you in a biological sense. It effortlessly rearranges your quantum geometry. That is a terrifying reality. When you finally strip away the comforting illusions of human grandeur, the reality of our daily existence becomes profoundly fragile. We spend our entire lives blindly pretending that we are solid objects successfully navigating a permanent, solid world. We aggressively fight for territory, ruthlessly accumulate resources, and build towering monuments to celebrate our own perceived immortality. We desperately convince ourselves that we are the undisputed masters of our planetary domain. Is this anything more than a collective delusion? The universe is vast, ancient, and entirely indifferent to our magnificent architectural ambitions. We look at the sprawling industrial metropolis of Chicago and the glittering corporate campuses of Silicon Valley, and we proudly see an indestructible civilization. We look at our own reflections and see a permanent, unyielding biological vessel. But the cosmic truth is incredibly cold. None of this is truly solid. The molecular bonds keeping us miraculously intact are nothing more than a fragile, temporary promise made by physics. In the end, the human body, the towering skyscrapers, or this entire civilization, we are just dust holding hands. And a magnetar just forces us to let go.